training legs is simply hard. There's nothing else to it. It's harder than training upper body. You know, I can wake up 4:30 in the morning, walk in the garage and start doing any freaking upper body movement and I'll feel all right. Whereas squatting and deadlifting or lunging or Bulgarian split squatting, anything like that, it's harder, man. It's harder. And if you think about it, there's a reason for that. Like, you know, in my mind, I think of the body as two separate joints, you know, two separate sets of joints. You got the hips and then you got the shoulders, right? It's kind of like similar joints, you know, they both have, you know, range of motion, like unlike knees and elbows, right, where the hinges. The hips can move a whole lot. The shoulders can move even more. But with that mobility that the shoulders have comes instability, you know, comes, you know, decreased strength when you compare to the hips. The hips are weight bearing, you know, they constantly have weight on them. And the hips is where you find the strongest muscles in the body, you know, glutes, hamstrings, adductors, quads. Those are very, very large muscles. And so it makes sense why these large muscles, why this big joint is harder to ambulate, harder to mobilize. But once you get it going, you're all right. But it takes a little bit to get them going because it's almost like starting a big V8, right? You know, starting a 7-liter, you know, you got to be careful with that much machinery, that much size of an engine. You can't just turn it on and floor it. Whereas, you know, turning on a, you know, 1.2 cylinder, I don't know, Kia, Rio or something. I don't even know what car, Corolla or something like that. You know, there's smaller parts and you can kind of turn it on and go pretty much right away. The shoulder joint is very, very mobile. Like if you think about it, you can move that thing any which way. So this is why at 4:30 in the morning, you can wake up and do push-ups, pull-ups, rows, bench press, like pretty much straight away. Like there's very little going on there. You just have the mobility required for these movements. Whereas 4:30 in the morning squats, you wake up and you're like, man, like you can't even get into the position. Like how many times have you done a push-up and you're like, oh man, I can't even get into position? You know, most people, like most beginners, intermediates, they have no problem getting into a push-up position. I would even say an advanced athlete. I mean, I've seen some guys who have had injuries of the elbows and the shoulders and they have trouble getting in. But I'm talking about, you know, take injury out of the equation. Most people have no trouble with upper body movements, you know, barring injury. You know, I've never come into a garage or a gym and be like, man, I'm really struggling with my overhead mobility, or I'm really struggling with my bench press or rowing or whatever. It's just automatic, man. And if you think about why people skip legs, it's because it takes a little bit of time, you know, number one, to learn the technique. Number two, to like actually get the mobility to do the technique. You know, I don't know how many times I've been approached and people are like, Ivan, how do I squat? And you can just see, you know, they don't have the mobility. You know, I can cue them until the cows come home, but they don't actually have the right tools. They don't have the right mobility to actually get in. So, you know, I could be telling them all sorts of secrets in their ear. They just cannot get into those positions. Whereas if I teach somebody how to do a push-up, literally it's instantaneous, man. Like, there's nothing else to it. And I think the reason for that is because, like we said, the engine size. You know, the biggest, strongest muscles of our bodies are found in the lower body. You know, and somebody interested in human performance, somebody interested in bodybuilding, powerlifting, CrossFit, weightlifting, you know, this is the center of our being. I really believe that. The hips, it's all in the hips. You know, a lot of guys come to me and they're like, Ivan, squatting is all about ankles. It's like, I'm not doubting that ankles have a lot of, you know, play in it. Like wrists have a lot of play in it, in upper body movements and elbows. But I think you always have to start with the biggest thing, man. The biggest thing is the hips. You know, and for the upper body is the shoulders. You got to address that first. There's no point having a lot of dorsiflexion and you have no hip internal rotation, external rotation. You can't have flexion or extension. Like if you're locked up in the hip, I don't care what sort of hip or ankle mobility you have, you just won't be able to perform because, you know, the muscles which are governing the lower body all come to the hips. That's the thing. You can train your tibialis anterior and your peroneals and the calves and whatever that. They all have a part. I'm not saying these parts are not, you know, a valued part of the system. But, man, you have to address the elephant in the room. And it sucks, man. I'll be the first one to tell you, man. I've been squatting for a long time. And I think about this a lot, and I'm actively kind of trying to work out things and precipitate some of these ideas. And, over the course of all these days, man, like, it just screams to me that the key to human performance, I don't really care what you're obsessed with, deadlift, squat, running, jumping, all of that. It all starts with the hips, man. It all starts with the hips, because once you address that, like knee pain, I would say, like, I'm not a professional at any of this, but I would say the majority of knee pain comes from the hips. There's, like, what's going on at the knee? It's a simple joint, man. It's a door hinge. It's a hinging. There's nothing else going on. So, what's happening there? I would even say tendonitis and all of these issues, super inferior, like whatever you want to call it, man. All these issues. I think if you have well-aligned hips and you have that tracking and you have that unrestricted hip mobility, then the forces are not going to be torqued. They're not going to be twisted as they get to the knee. Right? That's my true belief, because I know when I come in there, I want to squat, I want to deadlift. If my hips are feeling good, I am performing well. I always harp on about how my hips feel, and the way I walk around the house dictates how well I think I'm going to go in the gym. And once I warm up and I'm like, oh man, I was right, like I'm feeling really loose, my muscles are balanced, I'm feeling kind of stacked. Hip pain, hip pain, back, like if you got lower back pain, man, like I always say to people, glutes, get your glutes right. Do you have a excessive posterior pelvic tilt, anterior? All of that has implications upstream and downstream. But I get it why people skip legs, because it's freaking confusing and it's hard to work out what's going on. You got all these big muscles going on, and you're supposed to balance them all out to have even a good looking or an effective squat. There's a lot going on, and because we sit all day, like if you think about it, we're not sitting on our shoulders. You're sitting on your hips. And so we rarely get into these ranges of motion. Whereas the shoulders, like you're always, you're exploring the end ranges of shoulder mobility basically every single day just to freaking live, man. Like open the car door, get in, reach in the back seat, reach this way, reach that way, like pick something off the ground. Like our arms are always moving around. Whereas hips, it's like we walk, then we sit. We walk, then we sit. Like we rarely get into a sumo stance or a lunge or anything like that. And so mix that up with big, strong muscles. Now they tighten up and you're freaking screwed, man. Then you rock up at the gym after 8 hours of sitting and you're like, I want to get into an ETG. I mean, forget about it. It doesn't work like that. I need to get out of here, fellas. And probably one lady watching somewhere. Appreciate all of you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.